All right. I think we can start now, right?
Yes, Shank, you can start it like.
All right. Greetings to everyone present here. I, Shashank Balakrishnan, cordially welcome you all to the last Think Talk of Technex'22, where we celebrate the scientific temper and intellectual curiosity of students from all across India. Asia's oldest techno-management fest, Technex, is the annual flagship event of IIT BHU Varanasi that receives a footfall of over 20,000 students from across 400 colleges in India every year. With the theme Simulating Reality, the 83rd edition of Technex is here to inspire science enthusiasts and broaden their horizons. Economics helps us understand the world around us and explains how people, markets, businesses, and governments make decisions and how these decisions impact countries' social and political health. It explains the factors that influence the financial choices of big markets and how we spend our money as individuals and run our households. On the third day of Technex'22, we have among us a stalwart in the field of economics and public policy. Please welcome our prominent guest for today's Think Talk, Dr. Duvvuri Subbarao. Dr. Subbarao is an Indian economist, central banker, and civil servant. He has decades of rich experience in public finance and has held various important offices in this sphere. He was the lead economist at World Bank from 1994 to 2004 and served as the governor of the Reserve Bank of India from 2008 to 2013. During his tenure as RBI governor, he stewarded the Indian economy during the aftermath of the global financial crisis. Dr. Subbarao is renowned for coming up with the theory of the new trilemma of central bankers, the Holy Trinity, which established the Indian perspective in the academic debate on the global central banking trilemma. On behalf of Team Technex, I warmly welcome you to this extravaganza of an event that lies at the crossroads of science and technology. We're delighted and honored to have you on board for Technex'22. Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Shashank, and thank you for inviting me to speak at Technex'22 of IIT BHU. I know what you're all thinking right now. You're thinking, what's this guy going to say? He was governor of RBI, was finance secretary, topped the civil service exam. Is he really as great as all that? What's he going to tell us? You are, in a way, forming your first impression of me. This is something we all do. When we meet a person, we subconsciously, in the first 15 seconds of meeting that person, are forming your first impression of that person. My own experience has been that first impressions are often misleading. Let me give you an example. When I was in the World Bank 20 years ago, I went for a one-week training program on leadership. It was a one-week program. There were about 15 of us at a resort. We were all strangers to each other. In the very first session, even before we were introduced to each other, even before we could break the ice, the training coordinators divided us into 3 subgroups of 5 each, put us in 3 separate rooms, and there was a coordinator in each room sitting in the corner, and she gave us a topic to discuss. A topic like, for example, should there be more IITs in the country? Or should children be taught in their own mother tongue? A very neutral topic. And she said, discuss. So 5 strangers sitting in a room, not knowing each other, we discussed the topic for about 55 minutes. And at the end of the hour, she said, okay, all of you heard each other. Now take a small piece of paper and a pencil. Write your impression of the other 4 people. You don't have to tell it to them. You don't have to tell it to me. Just write it down and keep it in your pocket. That's what we all did. And for the next 5 days, Monday to Friday, we were all together, training together, learning together, playing together, eating together, living together. And on the last session on Friday evening, she said, take out a slip of paper and compare what you wrote on Monday morning with your impression of the person today. And our impression at the end of 1 week was so different from the very first impression. The reason I'm telling you this is because if you want to be an effective leader, if you want to be an effective professional, you got to understand, you got to learn how to make a judgment of other people, but you got to remember at the same time that first impressions are often misleading. With that introduction, what I'm going to do over the next 35 minutes is to talk to you about some of the lessons that I've learned the hard way over my career. I've listed down about 8 lessons. I'm not sure I'll have the time to go through all of them. Let me see how much I can get through. The first lesson I learned is that whatever you have to do it with passion. You know, if you go to a leadership seminar or if you read a self-help book like The Alchemist or Jonathan Livingston Seeger, oftentimes you're told that the secret to success in life is to discover your passion and follow it. Discover your passion and follow it. Very good. But my own lesson, my own understanding has been that most often you do not have the opportunity to follow your passion. The lesson I learned is that whatever you have to do it with passion. Whether you like it or not, do it with passion. Because if you sit around brooding about what you have to do, you will actually be a failure. On the other hand, if you take any task that is given to you, take it by the horn, try to do your best, you're more likely to succeed than to fail. So the true test of character, the way I learned, is that whatever you have to do it with passion. Let me give you an example. I joined the IAS 50 years ago. About 35 years ago, when I was in Andhra Pradesh here, we had a chief minister called NTR. He was a movie actor who became a chief minister. NTR did not drink. Not only did he not drink, but he detested people who drank. And his mission in life was to see that people stop drinking. Particularly poor people. He believed that poor people were drinking themselves to death, starving their families, starving their children, and ruining their livelihood. So he thought that he must impose prohibition. So what did all of us civil servants do? We told him, sir, you cannot do that. Why? You can't do that because the excise revenue that we get, the revenue on selling liquor that the state government gets is an enormous amount. And all the populist programs that you want to implement for the people, like give them free rice, give midday meal for children, give subsidies to farmers, all that will depend on our continuing to get this tax. So if you give up this tax, we can't fulfill your election promises. So civil service ganged up and persuaded NTR that he cannot impose prohibition. So NTR decided that if I cannot impose prohibition, I'm at least going to make sure that poor people who drink are drinking clean liquor. They're not drinking adulterated liquor. They're not drinking hooch on the street and dying there. So he decided that he must set up bottling plants in every district of the state. There were 22 districts in Andhra Pradesh at that time. And as soon as he decided, he said this must be done in the next 9 months. So over the next half an hour, it decided that the government will set up ARIC, that's what the country liquor is called here, ARIC bottling plant in every district of the state. And lo and behold, they appointed me as a special officer for implementing that. I was completely shattered. There were 350 IAS officers in the state. Why did they have to choose me? I was in industrial promotion at that time, having a good time, enjoying my job. I thought I was doing well. Why did they pick on me and ask me to do this? I did not show any special aptitude for setting up bottling plants for liquor. So I was shattered. For 1 week, I did nothing but brood. This was a no-end job. It just could not be done in 9 months. It is not career enhancing. If you actually start this and fail, it'll actually be a setback for your career. And most of all, what do you tell? You joined the IAS to change the world. You thought you'd do great things. And then you're asked to set up liquor bottling plants. You go to a wedding and your family and friends will ask you, what are you doing these days? You tell them, I'm setting up liquor bottling plants. That's completely embarrassing. So for 1 week, I sat around and brooded. But then I decided that if I have to do it, I'm going to do it. I had no office, no support, no nothing. They just abandoned me. So over the next weeks and months, I put together the staff, put together a plan, systems, processes, implemented it. All sorts of things. When we got to implement a project like that, we worked like a war machine. And by the end of the 9 months, we actually had bottling plants in every district of the state, fully set up, fully functioning, fully established, fully staffed, all processes and systems on the word go. It is a matter of enormous satisfaction. Even today, looking back 35 years later, people ask me, what is your most challenging assignment? I probably would pick that as my most challenging assignment, because I started off having no interest, no passion in that subject, and I proved something to myself that driven to the corner, if you take on any task that you have to do it with passion and professionalism, you will succeed. That's the first lesson I learned. The second lesson is keep your ear close to the ground. When I became governor, appointed governor of the Reserve Bank of India back in 2008, that was about 14 years ago, I went to call on the Prime Minister, Dr. Manmohan Singh. He was kind enough to appoint me. I was finance secretary until then. I wanted to thank him for the confidence he had in me for sending me to the Reserve Bank. And then I was just alone with him. It was in his office in the South Block in Delhi. There were just two of us. We chatted for about 10 minutes. He had known me, of course, as finance secretary, but not very well. I was one of the senior secretaries to the government. He'd known me, had a good impression of me. That's probably why he appointed me as the governor. So after we chatted for about 10 minutes, I asked the Prime Minister, sir, you yourself were governor of the Reserve Bank 25 years ago. Do you have any advice for me? Dr. Manmohan Singh, is a very humble person. He said, what advice can I give you? You've been in the IAS, you've seen the country, you've seen the villages, you know the country, you know our system, you know the government. I'm sure you will do a good job. Go and do whatever you have to do. So we spoke for another 10 minutes, and then I got up to take leave of him. And, he was a very courteous man. He walked me to the door of his office. And just as I opened the door to get out, he put his hand on my shoulder and said, Subbarao, you asked for my advice 10 minutes ago. I declined to give you advice, but I thought I'll give you one piece of advice, which is that, you've been in the IAS, you've seen the country, you've been exposed to the government, you've met people. But the Reserve Bank of India is a different ballgame altogether. When you go to Mumbai, sit in that air-conditioned office, and you're dabbling with all the numbers, credit growth, inflation, money supply, non-performing assets, growth rate, you will forget that behind the decisions you're taking are real people. So remember, whatever you have to do, it makes a big difference to people across the country, millions of people across the country. In short, he said, keep your ear close to the ground. So I remembered that. I went to Mumbai, I became governor. And then over the next months and a year, I realized the importance of the advice the Prime Minister gave. One of the the principal task, the main responsibility of the RBI, as perhaps many of you know, is to maintain low and steady inflation. So every 2 months, the RBI comes out with a policy statement. Some of you may have seen that on the TV or read about it in the newspapers or got it on the social media. Every 2 months, the RBI comes out with a policy on the inflation stance of the RBI. In the lead up to the policy, the RBI consults all stakeholders on what needs to be done. It consults banks, corporates, finance sector professionals, financial markets, economists, market specialists, academics, farmers, consults all of them to get their perspective on what the RBI needs to do. But it occurred to me, after going through these policy reviews for about 1 year, that the RBI does not really consult people who are most affected by inflation. The people who are most affected by inflation are the poor people in the country. Inflation, as some of you who've studied economics know, is a regressive tax. It hurts poor people more than it hurts well-off people. For example, the shirt I bought, let's say I bought it for 1,200 rupees. If the price of the shirt goes up to 1,250, I may not even realize it. But if the price of rice, for example, goes up from 50 to 55 rupees per kg, poor people immediately realize that because inflation hurts them very much. And here was the RBI charged with the primary responsibility of maintaining low and steady inflation, not consulting the most important stakeholder group. So I thought it is very important to keep your ear close to the ground. After all, if I consulted all these people, like I told you about all the bankers, economists, academics, financial market specialists, none of them ever went to a market, none of them ever goes to a market to buy brinjals or rice. They have other people to do it. They don't experience inflation like poor people do, who are buying things every day in the market. So the RBI, in order to keep its ear close to the ground, should actually have consulted people who are most affected by inflation, poor people. We didn't do that. So the Prime Minister's advice to me stuck in my head. Let me give you another example of this, probably that will you associate with that more. Rapes in the country, they happen, unfortunately, every day across the country. And it's a great tragedy that rapes happen. Most of the time, the victims are hounded, but the alleged perpetrators, they're not caught or convicted. But you know that every time a rape happens and it comes in the media, there's agitation in the country. That so many rapes are happening, the opposition comes up, people write editorials, comes on the social media. The rapes are happening all too frequently because the punishment is not harsh enough. So we must make the punishment even more harsh so as to deter people from going into raping. So they say first life imprisonment, then hanging, then trial within 10 days, trial within 1 week, etc. But is the harshness of the punishment the real problem? If you actually investigate cases of rape, their actual inquiry into court, most rape cases fail because the witnesses back out, because there are no witnesses. And if rape is a sort of a crime for which it's very difficult to get a witness. And if you do get a witness, those witnesses back out because they've been threatened. So if you want to increase the conviction for rape, if you want to deter potential criminals from committing rape, what you have to do is not increase the punishment, but actually make sure that the potential witnesses are protected. That's the importance of keeping your ear close to the ground. Let me move to the third lesson on my list, which is that you have to earn your credibility. If you want to be an effective leader, if you want to be an effective professional, you have to be credible. And credibility is not something that is given to you on a platter. You have to earn it from your teammates, from your organization, from your institution. You have to earn your credibility. Let me again give you an illustration for this in order to make my point. I became governor of the Reserve Bank of India in September 2008, about 14 years ago. Actually, the date was 5th of September 2008, and most of you must have been in primary school or high school. 5th of September 2008 was a significant date in terms of the financial history of the world, because 5th of September, I became governor. 7th of September, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac fell. 8th of September, Countrywide went down. 10th of September, Merrill Lynch vanished. 11th of September, AIG came to the brink of a meltdown. 13th of September, Washington Mutual was liquidated. 16th of September, Lehman Brothers collapsed. Plunged the world, plunged the global financial system into a near-death experience. The global economy was plunged into a deep recession, the deepest since the Great Depression 80 years ago. There was concern, anxiety, panic, bewilderment among governments, markets, central bankers about what needs to be done, how to control the crisis. Storied institutions were falling every day. The crisis was spreading like wildfire. It started in America, spread to Europe, spread to Asia, and spread to the rest of the world. Everybody was concerned, anxious, panicking, and markets were collapsing. The crisis affected every country, as I said. It affected India too. But in India, there was dismay, disbelief, denial that our country could be affected. Why the story going around was that it was American banks, American finance, which was indulging in excess. It's okay if America got into a financial trouble. Because America and Europe are linked, it's okay if the financial panic spread from America to Europe. But why should it spread to India? Our banks did not do anything sinful. Our financial markets were okay. Our financial markets were stable. Why should India be affected by the crisis? So the story going around was that this new governor came. He brought on the crisis. So I couldn't contest that. So I took it in my stride. Wherever I went to the country, people would ask me, "Sir, when will this crisis end?" As if I knew. But I used to say, look, if you people thought that I brought on the crisis, it'll end when my term is over. And for good measure, I used to tell them when my term would actually be over. But note this. In the week after I left the Reserve Bank, at the end of 5 years, the crisis ended. 4 or 5 years, there was one crisis after another. The week after I left the Reserve Bank, crisis ended. Growth started trending up, inflation started trending down, the exchange rate stabilized. If there was one prophecy I wish I had been wrong on, it was this. But that was not my lot. The reason for telling you, giving you this preface, is to actually tell you that in the weeks and months after that, it's literally baptism by fire for me. I was new to the Reserve Bank of India. I was new to central banking. I was plunged into this crisis, and I had to manage this as a greenhorn governor. We did a lot of things to contain the impact of the crisis on India. I don't want to go into all those details. There were very many challenges. But there's only one challenge that I want to talk about, which is I did not have credibility. And how would I earn the credibility of the economy, of the country, and of my own institution, the Reserve Bank of India? Let me elaborate on this. When I became governor, I was an unknown quantity. As finance secretary, I was an unknown person. As civil servants, as IAS officers, we've been trained to be anonymous. For example, all of you know today who the governor of the Reserve Bank of India is. You probably don't know who the finance secretary of the country is because the finance secretary is an anonymous person. So I was similarly anonymous as finance secretary, was taken out of there and made the governor. So within 24 hours, as finance secretary in Delhi, I moved to Mumbai as the governor. I was an unknown unknown one day. I was a known unknown the other day. But the governor of the Reserve Bank is a public person. The markets listen to him. Markets want to hear what he says. The governor has to communicate. Markets trying to get signals from what the governor is saying, from his spoken word, from his body language. All this takes understanding between the markets, between the media and the government. That takes about 6 months, at least. That 6-month time for adjustment was denied to me. So there was concern, anxiety in the markets about this new fellow who would come as the governor of the RBI. Can he actually navigate India through this very complex once-in-a-generation crisis? In short, I did not have credibility. That would have been bad enough. What compounded the problem, though, was that, as I told you, I was finance secretary the day before, I became governor the day after. The governor of the RBI is supposed to be an independent person because the RBI is supposed to be an institution independent of the government, taking decisions quite independent. But the story going around was that the government appointed their own finance secretary as governor so as to control him. He would be listening to them, he'd be pliable. The reason for that suspicion was that I was the first serving finance secretary to be appointed as governor. There were finance secretaries appointed as governor before me, but there was a gap. I was the first person, finance secretary one day, the governor the next day. So the story was that, look, the government picked this guy, appointed him in the RBI so that he would be their pliable person there. And it did not help that to manage the crisis, the RBI had to work very closely with the government. In fact, around the world, in America, in UK, in Europe, in China, in Japan, everywhere governments and central banks were working closely together. But in India, if the RBI and the government worked closely together, the story was that, look, we told you this guy would take instructions from the government. If I flew to Delhi, as I was doing quite often at that time, they would compound the story that, look, we told you this governor takes instructions from Delhi, he's gone to Delhi to take instructions. So that hurt my credibility even further. That would have been bad enough. What made it even worse was that I did not have credibility in my own institution within the RBI. I was unknown to the markets. I was unknown even to my own staff within the RBI. So they were also quite suspicious about me. If, for example, I told them we got to cut interest rate, they would say that this guy knows what he's talking about. Imagine this, even 2 months before I took over, because inflation was very high, my predecessor, Dr. Y.V. Reddy, had actually raised interest. And here I was coming as a greenhorn governor within weeks after my taking charge in order to manage the crisis I was telling my staff, we must cut interest rate and not by just a small amount, by as much as 1 percentage point in one go. It's never been done before. So my staff, as much as some of them believed that needed to be done, they were not confident that I was making the right judgment call. So my leadership ability was suspect. My credibility was suspect. All these things compounded together to deny me the credibility that I needed to manage the crisis, manage a once-in-a-generation crisis. But what is a matter of enormous satisfaction to me is that in the 100-day analysis of my leadership of the RBI, virtually everyone wrote that I led the institution through an extraordinary crisis with confidence, credibility, and competence. That is a matter of satisfaction for me. And the same thing was written in the one-year assessment of my term as the governor. So the lesson that I learned is that whenever you go to a new institution, new organization, or new team, if you want to establish yourself as a leader, as a professional, you have to earn your credibility. Let me go to my fourth lesson, which is that in public policy, there's no black and white, only shades of gray. I don't know how many of you heard of this movie, Sophie's Choice. Sophie's Choice, it came out in 1982 before you were all born, but you may have seen it. It's the first movie of Meryl Streep. She won an Oscar for it. It's about Sophie is a Jewish woman who was captured by the Nazis, sent to the Auschwitz concentration camp, along with the two little children. The commanders at the concentration camp, they give her a choice. They tell her, one of your children has to go to a concentration camp, to the gas chamber. One of the children has to go to a labor camp. Decide which child will go to the gas chamber, which child will go to the labor camp. There's a gut-wrenching choice for Sophie. As leaders, whether it is public policy or need, even in the private sector or any sector for that matter, when you go to make decisions, there's no black and white, only shades of gray. Let me give you a recent example. 2 years ago, when the world was hit by COVID, here in India, exactly 2 years ago, March 2020, the government had to decide whether to impose a lockdown. That was a very difficult choice because lockdowns were unprecedented, never happened before. So the dilemma for the government was that if they did not impose a total lockdown, millions of lives would be lost to the disease and there would be death, destruction. On the other hand, if they imposed a lockdown, there would be loss of livelihoods. So how should they decide? This is not something that the government can decide because there was no prior experience for what needed to be done. In the event the government decided to impose a total lockdown, just giving 4 hours notice, and in the event, we now know with the benefit of hindsight that it could have been handled better. Even if a lockdown was necessary, it could have been handled better by giving people time to adjust, prepare for the lockdown. We learned a lesson. The government had to make a choice without any prior experience. Because as much as they thought about it, there was no black and white, only shades of gray. Let me give you another example that you might probably relate to. 2 years ago, when your IIT had to be closed under the lockdown, all of you were sent home. The choice or the decision for the IIT management, your director and the senior management of the RBI of the IIT, was to when to reopen it. When should we ask the students to come back? Because if they ask the students to come back and there's another lockdown, the cost will be even higher. So they had to make sure that if they had actually opened it, they could deliver classes. There was enough faculty, there was enough facilities, there was hostel facilities, food facilities, recreation facilities, health facilities open. So how do they face down the lockdown? In fact, Shashank was telling me that for 2 years he's not gone to the IIT at all. So for the management of the IIT, deciding when to lock down and when to reopen and how to reopen was a big decision. There was no black and white, there was shades of gray. Let me give you an example from my own experience. You heard of microfinance. Microfinance, where small loans are given to poor people. Microfinance started in Bangladesh, then it spread to countries around the world, including India. It was here in India, actually, that microfinance grew, mushroomed, and spread all over the country. It was here that various experiments were done. We understood microfinance better. And in course of time, over years, it helped millions of poor people, especially poor women, get loans from the banking system through the microfinance institutions and improve their livelihood. In 2010, when I was the governor, there was an agitation against microfinance. Until that time, for the last 30, 35 years, as microfinance was growing, there was happiness, there was joy, there was some triumph that something that we could not do all these years, we have ultimately discovered the Holy Grail. We've not discovered the formula for helping poor people get loans from the banking system. That was a problem because banks were reluctant to lend directly to poor people because they thought poor people were not bankable. They would not repay the loan. But when a microfinance institution came in between the bank and the poor borrower, there was value added. Because the microfinance understood the poor borrower, they could borrow from the bank, they took the risk. Millions of people, as I said, were lifted out of poverty. We were all very happy. And then it blew up in our face in 2010. There was an agitation. Started here, where I live in Andhra Pradesh. And the agitation was started because some microfinance borrowers had committed suicide. Tragic as it was. So people said microfinance institutions are charging exorbitant interest rates. The agitation spread like wildfire. The charges against microfinance was that they were charging very high rates of interest. They were deploying usurious methods for recovering their loans. And they were actually exploiting the poor people by loading one loan after another on them, making poor people indebted more than they could repay. So we were concerned in the RBI. The RBI was concerned because the RBI is the regulator of microfinance institutions. It was the responsibility of the RBI to see that something like this could not happen. On the other hand, we were thinking that microfinance is a great success, a great triumph, and then this agitation grew up in our face. So there was concern, anxiety about were we sleeping at the wheel? What is it that we did wrong? Did we not catch something? Did we not keep our ear close to the ground, right? Like I told you before. So the agitation, as I told you, was about one of the points of agitation was that microfinance institutions charging high rates of interest. So the solution, seeming solution, was to enforce a ceiling on the interest rate that microfinance institutions can charge. Until then, that interest rate was not regulated. But because of this agitation, the automatic solution seemed to be that if we impose the ceiling on how much maximum rate of interest that microfinance could charge, this problem would not arise in the future. But what this are you serious rate of interest? I struggled with this because I had to decide on this. We were concerned about putting a ceiling on the rate of interest because if we put the ceiling too low, microfinance institutions would find that they cannot do business, they would become unviable, they would fold up and go away. The consequence of that will be that all these millions of poor women who are borrowing from microfinance institutions will have to go back to the money lender. Whereas the microfinance was charging them 25% maybe, the money lender would charge them 100%, 150% rate of interest. Should we do that? What in fact is a serious rate of interest? You see pushcart vendors on the streets of cities and towns across India. A pushcart vendor, a woman there, if you tell her she wants to borrow 1,000, 5,000 rupees in the morning, and if somebody gives her a loan of 5,000 rupees and says that you must repay 5,250 with 250 rupees interest at the end of the day, she'll happily take that because that's a relatively low rate of interest for her, 10% or 5%. Okay. 5% per day, which is about 1,500, 2,000% per year. You would think that's usurious, but she'd be quite happy to pay that. So who are we to decide what is a usurious rate of interest? If we actually impose the ceiling, will microfinance fold up and we would actually throw these people back at the mercy of money lenders? That was my Sophie's choice. I had to decide. So the lesson I learned is that in public policy, you can get all the advice, you can do all the analysis, but ultimately, there is no black and white. You've got to make a judgment. Judgment calls are very important. I've spoken for about 45 minutes. Although I have more material to cover, I will stop here in order to take some questions. Okay. I will stop sharing now. Shashank, is that okay?
Yes, sir, that's all right. So thank you very much, sir, for your insightful remarks. It was indeed a tremendous pleasure to listen to your things. Our audience was constantly hooked throughout your discourse and have a few questions they would like you to address. So starting with your career, your trajectory has been very fascinating. So you first started off pursuing physics at IIT Kanpur before becoming an IAS officer, which you did by topping the civil services examination. And if that was not impressive enough, you then transitioned to economics and public finance, in which you've held high-level offices at both national and international levels. So what explains this very interesting career path of yours?
What explains what?
This interesting career path that you have taken.
Well, I've been asked this question before, and I've never found a satisfactory answer for this. In part because you cannot plan your career for 40 years from the word go. You got to navigate your career as you go along. You cannot decide that, look, I'm going to IIT BHU, I'll graduate and then go to Stanford, or I will join the corporate sector, or I'll go into the IAS, or I'll go to the NGO sector, or I'll do my own startup. You got to do a lot of things. And at each point of time, you got to decide what is optimal. You all know that. When you decided to do engineering rather than anything else, you made a decision. It's not as if you mapped out your next 45, 50 years. Although you have some aspirations, you have some ambitions, but at each point of time, you've got to map your next step. That's exactly what happened. In fact, 50 years ago, when I was like most of you, career choices were much, much fewer than you have today. There were very, very few things to choose from. We took whatever was the first thing we got. Of course, for an IIT student at that time, to actually write the IAS was quite common. Today, of course, the IITs are completely taken over the IAS, as nearly 25% of every IAS batch is of IIT graduates. but I was probably the first, second, or third IIT to actually get into the IAS. So I wanted to do the IAS because I thought it was a career that was interesting for me, but I wasn't sure that I would make it. So I had other options. I thought probably if I don't make the IAS, I'll go and do an MBA. Okay. And then having joined the IAS, I realized that yes, I've studied physics. But after working for 2-3 years, I decided that I can be a better IAS officer. I can be a better civil servant if I understand economics a little bit. So I applied to the US universities for economics and I got in. I studied economics. I came back without completing my PhD. A few years later, I went back to the US to study further. Again, I had to come back without completing my PhD. And then subsequently, I got my PhD from Andhra University many years later. So my response to your question is that it's very difficult to map your career as much as you have aspirations, ambitions to that. It's very important to have aspirations, very important to have ambitions, but be flexible, do the best you can at each point of time, whenever you come to a fork, take a decision. But I also want to tell you this, it was actually in one of my subsequent lessons that we couldn't get that far because I did not have the time. But I want to tell you that you have to take risks. If you're risk averse, you will not get very far. You will probably fail, but failure is part of learning. You will learn from your failures. So don't stop yourself from attempting something for fear that you will fail. Take risk. I don't want to tell you be reckless, but take calculated risks to do what you want to do and follow your heart. Okay, thank you.
Yes, this is one question that we get at this stage of our life all the time. And I'm pretty sure this cleared up a number of things that people have regarding their career choices. My next question to you is, as the world continues to globalize further and further, what role do you see India playing in shaping the global financial markets in the coming years?
Okay, that's a good question and probably a lecture by itself. If you look back 30 years ago to 1990, India was among the most closed countries in the world. You've not seen that anything like that at all. If we traveled abroad, all that we could take was $20. If we went to a shop, we had 3 brands of soap and 2 brands of shampoo to choose from. Everything was controlled in the country. What industries could be set up, where, at what price they must buy, at what price they must sell. Everything was in the country was licensed. Our shops were empty. There was very little variety. And then in 1991, because India confronted a severe balance of payments crisis, we opened up. We opened up by doing 3 things. First, industrial licensing was abolished. People can set up whatever they want, wherever they want, produce whatever they wanted. Second, reliance on public sector was reduced. Now, up until 1990, if anything had to be done, in fact, even if bread had to be baked, it was done in the government sector, private sector. Up until 1990, you wouldn't believe it, the government usually used to have factories baking bread and selling it. Okay. So that was the second thing they did, which is that reliance on public sector will be reduced. The third thing was that imports will be freed. Until then, if anybody wanted to import anything at all, you had to take permits, and there was enormous amount of corruption in getting permits. So those 3 things happened in 1990. Since then, we opened up quite a lot. Today, India is integrated into the world. We export into the world. We import from the rest of the world. Okay, am I audible? Hello, have I lost you?
So you can continue.
Oh, I can continue. Okay, suddenly I thought I lost all of you. Okay, so since 1990, India had opened up. Our trade integration is quite deep. We export to the world, we import from the world. Our financial integration is quite deep. A lot of capital comes into the country, a lot of capital goes out of the country. Foreign corporates come and invest here. Indian corporates go and invest outside. Indians go and invest in the markets outside the country. People come and invest in Indian markets. So India has integrated. If India has to play a more meaningful role in the world economy, we have to produce more, grow faster, increase our share in world GDP, increase our share in world exports, increase our share in world finance. And that's not going to happen just because we decide, it's not just the government, but everybody in the country, the government, the private sector, corporates, youth, including the farmers, everybody has to come together to make this a national project. India has to become competitive in order to produce and export. For that, we need to improve infrastructure here. We need to improve skills here. We need to improve education levels here. We need to improve entrepreneurship here. We need to deepen our markets. All these things the government is trying to do, we need to do, but we need to get together as a country and manage so many hurdles in order for India to be a more meaningful and a bigger player in the world economy. I'm sure we'll get there, but it's going to be quite a demanding task. I'll stop there. Is somebody there?
Yes, sir. Sorry for the inconvenience caused. I would like to ask you, how will the fintech?
What's your name?
I'm Sachi, sir.
Who?
I'm Sachi.
Sachi, okay.
So, how will fintech startups play a major role in shaping Indian economy?
Sachi, can you please repeat that question?
Sure. So, how will fintech startups play a major role in shaping Indian economy?
How do central bankers play?
I'm sorry, sir.
I'm sorry, I'm unable to understand the question.
Yes, sir, I'll repeat the question. How will the fintech startups play a major role in shaping Indian economy?
Oh, okay. How do fintech startups play a major role in shaping the Indian economy? That's a tough question, in part because I don't know the right answer. But fintech actually, as a concept, started when I was in the Reserve Bank still, but it actually expanded, diversified, and became more commonplace after I left the Reserve Bank over the last 8 to 9 years, which is a combination of technology and finance. Using technology to deliver financial products more efficiently in a way that people attach value to them. So there is fintech on one side, there is TechFin on the other side. You probably heard of that, which is, if fintech is financial companies deploying technology to deliver financial services more efficiently, TechFin is actually technology companies such as Facebook and Amazon or Google delivering financial services using their huge technology platform as the launching pad. I believe fintech can play a very important role in the Indian economy because one of the things we have to do in order for India to grow and for the benefits of growth to percolate to the bottom sections of the people, to the lower income groups, is financial inclusion. To see that everyone in the country, every household in the country has access to financial services, has access to the financial sector. Because what people want is not those, not subsidies, not handouts. They want an opportunity to improve their livelihoods and improve the opportunities for their children. So in order for that to happen, we need to widen and deepen financial inclusion. Financial inclusion has been a big challenge because on the one hand, it is the government and the RBI driving banks to give financial services to the poor people, but financial institutions, including banks, being reluctant or disinclined to do so. So I believe Fintech can play a very, very constructive role to complement what's happening here in making sure that financial services go to poor people, whether it is credit or saving opportunities or remittance opportunities, insurance, microcredit. I believe Fintech has a great, great role to play going forward in the growth and development of India. I'll stop there.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much. That was very enlightening. So, thank you very much for gracing the stage of Technex'22. Your enlightening words have left a remarkable impact on our minds and will no doubt motivate us to tread on the same path of greatness as you have. I thank the audience for their enthusiasm throughout the duration of the talk. I hope you are having a fantastic time in the 83rd edition of Asia's oldest techno management fest. So stay tech next and see you soon.
Thank you.
So I would like to request you to stay for a while since we have
Sure.
some members from the outreach club